we've laid out and played around with some styling. We've not made it make look any better. So there's all sorts of libraries, right, that have professional libraries that have collected all sorts of best practices and curated by lots of folks that have been around in the industry for quite a while, and they have created all sorts of these classes. So instead of us trying to reinvent the wheel and creating our own set of classes to make this look professional, there's several libraries that are developer centric, right, for folks who are developing applications, right, that declare a whole slew of classes for you that you just have to link into your page and start applying these classes strategically, and it will apply certain it'll make them look very, very professional, right? So let's do that. Let's start using a very popular library, right? And the library is called Bootstrap. So you can get a hold of Bootstrap by visiting Bootstrap. Yes.
If an element has two or more classes,
Yes.
and they have been styled in conflicting ways,
Yeah.
one class says background color
Yep.
is blue, the other says red.
Yep.
What is happening?
Yeah. Again, the more specific you are, the higher priority you have. So if you have a single class, right, will have less priority than one where you have two classes applied to one of them, both of them, right? So the one example that we had here was that we had two classes. It's more specific, right, than one that might have just one class, right? And so that will have priority over the one that has just one class.
Okay, but if in the style sheet say
Yeah.
one class says background blue and the other class says background red, then
Then
both of them are
well, then also so there's a whole algorithm of how to deal with conflicts, right? So for instance, one of the things that is taken into account is the order of declaration. So things that are declared later, right, override things that are declared before, right? So also it takes into account the order of the documents, right? When the way that you declare the order, right, of your declarations will take into account that. So there's a whole huge algorithm that we'll go over that conflicts when we talk about CSS formally next week. Yeah.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So can an element have both a class and
Yes. Yeah. Sure. And you can combine the rules. Hash ID dot the class, and be very specific on how you want to apply that. Yep. Yes. All right. So we're going to be using Bootstrap for the first couple of weeks, which declares all sorts of really nice reusable styles. Again, geared towards the developer, right? That's building applications online, and we certainly are doing that. We want to style this in such a way that it will look somewhat presentable. You have here, we want columns, we want this to be lists, we want those to be tabs, pills, and whatnot. Yes, and Bootstrap is perfectly suited to do these kinds of things, right? So let's look at Bootstrap. And for instance, I want to render things as lists. Well, first of all, let's link this. Let's link this into our document. So there's a couple of ways to link it. You can download it locally into your machine. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. And then you would link it just like you link everything else, right? You would use a link. You would use a link, and then to a CSS that lives locally on your machine, and that's perfectly fine, right? Especially when you're developing and you don't have access to the internet, it's great that you have a copy of the style sheet right on your machine, right? But when you're going to deploy this on a remote server, right, the best practice is not to download it and you host the sheet right on your machine. The best practice is to go fetch it in a server that is more likely to be up and running more than you, right? And these servers are referred to as content delivery networks, CDNs, right? They're very, very common. Let's go to a CDN. Let's look for a Bootstrap CDN. There it is. So one of the common CDNs is this one, Bootstrap CDNs. There's a whole bunch of CDNs out there. Google has its own CDN. Microsoft, Amazon, all of them have their own content delivery networks, right? And they're mostly all hosting their own files. Google, is pretty good at hosting, most of all the libraries, most of all the JavaScript libraries out there. So there's all sorts of CDNs, right? And the idea is that the browser has an optimization that if it already has a file that it knows that it has already downloaded from the internet, and it sees that you're referring to that same file, it'll say, oh, I already have that. I'm not going to go fetch it again, right? It's cached locally on my file system. So since these CDNs are so popular that Facebook uses them and Twitter and everybody uses these, chances are that folks have already visited these very popular websites and they have already downloaded these style sheets before getting to your poor unknown obscure website. Yes, so they'll probably already have these sheets already downloaded. So when they get to you, they say, "Oh, I already have that style sheet. I'm not going to download it again." So it's a benefit, right, for performance purposes when for you that it's more likely that they already have this and for your overall performance. So I'm going to copy this style sheet. There it is. Just copy that, and I'm going to head over to my HTML. I'm going to link it, right? Now I'm going to link it. Notice that I'm going to paste it higher in the document, right? And I'm going to link it over here because I want to make sure that I can override the style sheet, right? If I don't like a specific look and feel, I don't like the rounded corners, I don't like this background color that they chose, I can always override it locally. Yes. So I'm going to say href, paste in there. It's still a style sheet. Okay. I've done that. If I refresh here, notice that already it looks different, right? Notice that it removed the borders around. It looks like it's different using a different font, right? Or it's already overriding a whole bunch of things. Okay. I don't particularly like the fact that it's the content is flush, right up to the sides. So that's fine. We can always override that. Let's override a couple things here. And what we're going to do here is that one of the things that Bootstrap allows you to do is configure the overall look and feel of your main content page, right? And there's two very common ways of laying out a page, right? One of them is very popular, where you center all the contents right in the page and you have some margins on the side, right? That's a very common way of laying it out. Let's explore that first. The way we're going to do that is by using a div, right? A div is a generic block of content, right, that allows you to group together a whole bunch of content and treat it as if it were one thing, right? So we're going to use a div to do that, right? We're going to surround all our content with one big div from top to bottom. There it is. Okay, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't add any logic, nothing. So if I refresh, it doesn't change a thing, right? But it allows me to configure, right, this big block as one thing. One of the things that I want to do is I'm going to apply a very common class declared by Bootstrap, right? It's called the content. I'm sorry, container. Container. There it is. Container. If I do that and I refresh, notice that it brings some margins back to the sides. See that? If I zoom out a little bit, notice that it's changing the width. I think this is 100%. 100%. Yeah, at 100%, I believe the width is a standard 700 pixels. I forget what it is, and it puts some margins on the side and it's centered so that if I resize the page, it's still always centered on the screen. Right? I don't particularly like this layout. I usually use a different one called Container Fluid, which removes the centering, but it leaves some margins on the side, so it's not flush with either side. So I'm going to refresh. There it is. So it still has some paddings on the left. I think it's like 15 pixels on either side, right? And so it doesn't look like it's flush against the content. Everybody okay? All right, excellent. So the next thing is that we wanted to look like it's a row column, right? We want two columns. We want the module list on the left-hand side, and we want the lessons and topics on the right-hand side, right? So let's take a look at that. Right? So one way to achieve that is to use what Bootstrap calls the grid system. Bootstrap uses a grid system. It used to be early on in HTML that folks would use a table, right? They would create a table that has many rows and has many columns, and then they would say, oh, well, I want a left-hand side. I'll put it inside of a column. And I'll put the content on the right side of the column. Okay, this became very, very popular at the beginning of HTML. It has since fallen out of favor. HTMLs were not meant for that. Tables, HTML tables were meant for displaying tabular data, right? Where you have headings and you have rows, and each row is a kind of like a record, right? And each column has the same data type. It's meant for tabular content. But HTML by itself has no mechanisms for displaying columns, right? Unfortunately, the original intent was to display research papers, right? And research papers were just lots of paragraphs, right? Headings and paragraphs and headings and paragraphs, no columns. But today it's very common that in a magazine or a newspaper, right? If you have really big contents, to split it up into multiple columns. Yes, but there's no native support for that in HTML. It has to be done through CSS, right? And Bootstrap provides a mechanism to do that, right? Through its grid system, right? And the grid system is fully documented here. The grid system breaks up the page into rows and columns. Allows you to break up into rows. You declare one row and then multiple columns. So let's do that. The way it's done is as follows. You create a couple of divs, and you say that this is the row, right? And then in here, you can declare any number of columns. This is a column, and this is another column, right? Where you might have here the left-hand side, and this is the right side, right? If we, oops, right? So if we go back and refresh our content, notice that indeed we have the left side and right side there. See that, right? It's putting them side by side, right? If it didn't have these classes, if it did not have these classes, right, they would behave just like normal divs. Basically, don't do anything, right? Just group them into blocks of content, right? But here we are overriding the default styling, and we're setting it up as rows and columns. Make sense? All right. All right. So let's use that. Let's use this technique. Right. Let's use this technique right here. Oops. Right. And I'm going to try and move. Oops. We're going to move the module list on the left-hand side. I'm going to move the lessons and topics into the right-hand side. All right. So let's do that. I'm going to grab the modules. Where are the modules? So the modules are here, all the way up to, say, here. I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to move it into the left side, right there. Okay, making sure that I have the tabs correctly. So if I refresh, notice indeed now I have the module list on the left-hand side. See that? Right? And I can do the same thing with the lessons and topics. Right? I can grab the lessons and topics all the way up to here. I can just cut from here, and I can paste it on the right side. There we go, right? So we have the module list on the left and the topics and lessons on the right-hand side. It's not quite 1/3, 2/3. What the grid system does is that it splits up logically, it splits up the whole window into 12 equal units. Yes. Yeah, it's pretty common. Yep. We'll also take a look at Flex as an optional doing that. Flex is more used for styling individual components, whereas the grid system is used as to style like an entire page. So we'll take a look at both. Yep. So let's take a look at the default. So what Bootstrap does is that it splits up the page into a logical 12 equal units, right? 12 because it's a it's a nice round number that can be divided into multiple fractions. So divided by 3, divided by 4, divided by 2, by 6. And you can break up the columns into relative sizes, right? You can say as long as the columns add up to an entire 12. So we can say I want maybe 4 units for the left-hand side column, and I want the remainder 8 units on the right-hand side, right? And so this allows you to have more or less a 1/3 on the left-hand side and 2/3 on the right-hand side, okay? All right, excellent. So there we have the grid system. We'll spend much more time on the grid system, how you would build something, how it actually works. But let's leave it here. Let's take a look at now styling these things as tabs, lists, and whatnot. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at that next.